Again, I'm Efrem Reis. I'm the assistant director at the Hebrew Free Burial Association. We have been talking for 4 sessions now. This is our 4th session. First session, we talked about the end of life components. Then we went into what I would call funeral, which is prepare all the body, getting everything ready for burial. Then we did burial, cemetery, where we did the putting the body into the ground, talking about the Aron, the ark for a person. And now we're on our 4th and final session, which is about Shiva and beyond. So Shiva actually started in our last session. When people walked out of the cemetery, they were comforted with the traditional words of Ashkenazi tradition, at least. Hamakom yanachem etchem b'toch shar avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you among the mourners of Zion in Jerusalem. This is a phrase that you're going to hear a lot in the Shiva world. This is going to be how you say goodbye, essentially, to a person when you visit them at the Shiva house. Oftentimes, they'll put a sign up near the person sitting Shiva. That way, you have those words available and ready for you. I actually learned recently, although I can't recall the exact words, that the Sephardim actually use a different phrase. That is it's a much shorter phrase, but they use a different phrase as opposed to Hamakom yanachem etchem b'toch shar avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. So it's just something to know. All right, I wanted to start off with a video. The video is a little bit more from the right-wing world, but I wanted to show it because I think it speaks to one of the big challenges that happens at a Shiva house. So let me just share my screen here. And I'm going to share with optimized video, share sound. All right, so let me share this video.
So how old was he? Why aren't you covering your ankles? Is there like a heter not to wear tights during Shel? How long was he sick for? I lost my parents last year, and it's just amazing how you never ever get over it. Which doctors was he seeing? It's so interesting that you keep your TV out in the open and not like in an armoire. But what was he nifta from in the end? I get how you feel. We had to put my dog down last month. Did he suffer terribly? You're saying Kaddish? Really? But you're a girl. You're not one of those feminists, are you? Were you there when it, happened? Well, at least you could always get a cat to replace him, right? Oh, you could keep talking. I just need to get this. Hello? My son's bar mitzvahs come. Oh, you won't be able to come. Well, you could always put out benches. I know you're alright right now, but in a couple months, it'll hit you. Who was that boy here earlier? I guess your mom is just meant to be alone. Your mom's still young. She could find someone new. Those people who just left from? Does the short lifespan run in the family? Well, he's in a better place now. Was it weird seeing him in a box? Ugh, you have a dog.
I'm going to stop my share here. Reactions to the video. Anybody ever feel like they've heard those kind of phrases? At least something similar to that in a Shiva house. I see some nods that yes, they've heard that. I mean, listen, I'll tell you, the one that always got me. I was sitting Shiva for my mother 10 years ago, and as I was sitting Shiva for her, a couple of women came up to me and said, "So, was it cancer?" And I said, "No, it wasn't cancer." And they're like, "Oh, good." And exactly, I see the nods. This is because someone wants to make themselves feel better. They have a mindset of cancer is bad. I do not like cancer. So it's good that she didn't die of cancer. Meanwhile, she's still dead, right? Like that isn't actually comforting the mourner. That isn't making you feel better. That isn't doing all those things. And the truth is, one of the big mistakes that we often get ourselves into is thinking that on Shiva, we're supposed to be making someone feel better. I had a teacher when I was doing pastoral education. There was a rabbi who came in and talked about the story of Yosef. We just did Yosef a few weeks ago. And he was using Yosef's story to talk about empathy, not sympathy. How you empathize with someone. And his story was, in the Yosef story, his brothers take him, rip up his coat, and throw him in a pit. And the text is a little weird because we don't like to think that the text is extra words in the Torah. And so it says the pit was empty, there was no water in the pit. So the commentators like go crazy about this idea. What do you mean? If it was empty, why do you need to tell me there's no water in it? I know there's no water in it. You told me it was empty. There must be some bigger meaning going on here. So Rashi actually comes out and does this weird thing where he says that the fact there was no water in it means that there was scorpions and snakes in it, that the brothers were really bad. But this rabbi said, no, because there's two different pits that he's in. He's in the physical pit that his brothers threw him in, and he's in the emotional pit that his brothers threw him in. And if you were to go to Yosef in that moment and throw a rope down and say, here, grab onto the rope and come right on up the pit, he will get out of the physical pit. But that emotional pit, he's still going to be in. He can't just leave it. His brothers threw him aside. They did horrible things to him. He can't just simply snap out of it and climb out of the pit at that point. And so the teacher said, when you are trying to emotionally deal with someone who's in a pit, you can't just throw them a rope. You can't say this is going to solve the problem. Here's my answer. The way that you are help someone out who's in that emotional pit is you jump down in the pit with them. You say, okay, I can't fix this. Your mother's dead. I'm sorry. I don't have words for this. Why don't you let yourself share about, why don't you share? It's not for me to try to push my feelings on you. And I think that that's a real piece of Shiva. So before I really go on, let me show you all the different topics we're going to go through. So we watched our video here, and now we're going to go in from Shiva into Shloshim into Avelut. In the idea of flexibility of halacha to financial loss, which is an important piece here, that we're going to talk about. Zman Simcha, 11 months versus 12 months, and unveiling versus Matzevot. Now, for some reason, it used to show this, but now my setup does not show me your pictures. So if you have a question, please just either unmute or raise your hand on the symbol. I'll try to put the little the list of our participants here, so that way I can see and I can stop to answer any questions. Or you can unmute and just come right out and talk, and I'm happy. I want this to be more of a conversation. So Shiva, the 7 days starts from the time you get home from the cemetery until the beginning of the 7th day. We don't want it to. We're not trying to elongate this. It's not a positive time. It's not a happy time. And so the mindset of Shiva is the second you get home. So if you get home an hour before sunset, the whole day counts as it. So let's say you went to the cemetery on a Thursday afternoon, and in today's world, right? Let's say you were there at noon, and you got home, and it was a long drive, and there was traffic, and you got home at 3. You got
I
home at
thought the
3.
Shiva started as soon as the other people formed the two lines and you started to walk out.
So the status of you as a mourner has changed at that point, but Shiva does not actually start until you get home. And I'll tell you, at the cemetery, we do a little bit of a loophole sometimes when things are running late. Like today, I don't know what it was like in Cleveland, but sundown was around 4:15. So what we do is the second that you get home, that Shiva starts. So let's say it was today. If you got home before sundown on Thursday counts. The whole day of Thursday counts as Shiva. Then Friday, then Saturday, then Sunday, then Monday, then Tuesday. And on Wednesday in the morning, you get up after Shacharit. That's when the term we would use, get up. You get out of Shiva and you go and you do the traditional walk, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you notice, that was almost 5 days of Shiva, because, and even not even that, because Shabbat's not really a Shiva day. We'll talk a little bit about that. But it's a truncated day. Now, yes, if you're going to get on, if you're going to, at our cemetery, Rabbi Plofker, who's the chaplain in our community, he'll say, I'm just going to stop share so I can actually see you guys, because I don't like talking when I can't see you. He's going to say to you, if you were to come today and you were finishing at 2:30, it's going to take you a long time. You might hit bridge traffic. Things might happen, and you might not get there until the night. If you don't get there until the night, now you're starting your Shiva on Friday, and we don't want to make you start the Shiva on Friday. So we have a little chapel that we don't use as a chapel anymore because it's against the law in New York State. Don't need to get into all that. But we have a little chapel that we use. We usually use it to deal with any business that we have to take care of with the family before the funeral. And instead, what we'll say to them is, before you go on your way home, I want you to come into the chapel. I want you to take off your shoes, and I want you to sit on the floor for 5 minutes. By doing that, you've made the chapel into your home, and you've started Shiva at the cemetery, at this chapel. So that way you can still get that first day in, even if you didn't actually get a chance to get home in time before dark. So that's kind of the loophole we get around, so that way you don't get an extra day of Shiva. Table, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, it's Tybal, just to say
Table,
the
sorry.
Yeah. Does that mean that you have them do the ritual hand washing too? As
So yeah, good question. Sorry, I didn't know if you were saying more.
Well, but because at least in the tradition I know, there's the ritual hand washing, and then you go immediately and eat hard boiled egg or chickpea or something, which I assume you don't do in the chapel. I'm assuming the hand washing is more important than the eating.
Right. So the chapel, the hand washing actually has less to do with actually the Shiva piece. The origin of the hand washing is everybody's coming back from the cemetery. There is traditions of tuma, of ritual impurity. So anytime you leave a cemetery, the custom is to wash your hands, and there will be a hand washing station almost at every cemetery, as long as it's somewhat active. I'll tell you that our old cemetery at Hebrew Free Burial, the one that we finished using in 1908, we don't have a hand washing station there anymore. There's not really anybody who's coming and visiting. It's open once a year. It's our duty to protect that and preserve that cemetery. But it doesn't need bathrooms. It doesn't need all those facilities. Whereas our current cemetery does need that. So we do have the washing station. But if you can imagine, in antiquity, without running water, someone might not have a washing station at the cemetery. Well, the first thing you would do when you would get home is to wash your hands. I've had groups at the cemetery that are super strict. Like, the more religious you get, the more strict you are about washing hands, because the impurity of touching a dead body is higher than every other impurity. What I will tell you as a preface is, we all have that impurity already on us, and it's nearly, barring the Messiah, would be impossible to get it off of us. What do I mean by that? Just so you know, ritual impurity of a dead body does not come off by washing your hands. The only way that it really comes off is by being sprinkled with the water that's been mixed in with the ashes of a para adama, a red heifer. And that we haven't had a red heifer since the Second Temple. And most people would say that's the symbol of the coming of the Messiah. There are people who are searching for red heifers at all times. There's probably people who are trying to genetically alter to make a red heifer. But until that point, you can't get it off. And what's more challenging is tuma is contagious. Meaning, if you are in contact with someone else, or in the same room as someone else who has been in contact with a dead body, or been in wound with a dead body, you therefore cannot, you pass on that tuma, and you can't get it off unless you have this red heifer. So just to, this is a really side topic, but if you think about where most of us were probably born, we were probably all born in a hospital. More 90% of us were born in a hospital. If you were born in a hospital, odds are there was a dead body that was in that room or in that building, and therefore you have had tuma since you were born. So it's not really an issue that I'm so concerned with, but the custom still remains that people will put a washing cup outside of the Shiva house because of the custom to wash hands after cemetery. And you'll see people when they go to a cemetery wash their hands. But in general, you should just understand that it's all sacramental. It's not really a obligatory thing in the same way, because there's no way you can remove that tumah at this point in your life. Just a little fun fact that I always think about the tumah. By the way, some separate fun fact that I think I'll just not get too stuck on. If you've flown in a plane over Europe, you probably have tumah as well, because tumah continues to go up from the spaces. And if you go over a cemetery or anything like that, a Jewish cemetery, you therefore have hit the tumah. Only one airline actually creates their airlines with a dome in their luggage area to go under the seats, and that would be El Al. So other than El Al, you're flying over tumah, and that's just something that you deal with. I don't know why El Al cares that much, but they do care that much to make sure that there is that issue. And yes, Tybal also mentions that airlines transport remains. That's true. Again, if you're in the El Al plane, the remains will be in that tent, so therefore it doesn't pass up above to the passengers. It's just a really random fact that I've learned about. But again, the bottom line is we wash our hands for this reason. However, the washing hands doesn't really get rid of the tumah. All right, so if you were to do that setup that I was telling you about, where you go to the chapel early, you don't wash your hands yet because you haven't left the cemetery. You would wash your hands when you leave the cemetery, because that's when you do your hand washing. Also, side note, there is a prayer to say when you go to a cemetery if you haven't been there in over a month. I never get to say that prayer because I'm there pretty frequently. But there is a prayer to say it. And that's also something that often comes up. Not really during when you're going for a funeral, but when you're going and visiting. Okay, so you get to the Shiva house, and yes, as was said, you eat round foods. It's kind of that circle of life mentality, the cyclical piece. It's also tends to be plain foods, because it is not like you're eating because you have to eat, not because you're in dire needs to eat. You're not excited to eat. You're doing what you have to do, right? And a lot of this is a lot of the Shiva customs are really around things that you have to be doing, but you're not like the things that are allowed are necessities, right? People should be coming over to you to care for you, to check in on you. That's something you should be doing. But like the reason why everybody knows about mirrors, the reason why you cover a mirror is because you shouldn't be concerned with how you look at that moment. Again, we talked at the very end of last session about kriya, about ripping clothing. If you were doing a traditional kriya, not with the ribbon, you're going to be wearing that kriya ripped clothing every day for the next 7 days. The only exception would be for Shabbat. We'll change out of that. But other than that, you'll be wearing your kriya. You're really restricting. You're not wearing leather shoes, similar to like on a mourning day, on a Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur. You're not wearing leather shoes in the house. Another piece is people will sit on lower chairs. As a community, we do this, and we'll talk about community practice too on Tisha B'Av, where people sit on a lower chair. But for a mourner, you sit on the lower chair. When the people come to say Hamakom Yenachem Edchem, you should be sitting down. The idea is that they're coming to you and speaking to you from above, because you're in this lower state. You shouldn't feel the need to host. It's a weird feeling. You are a guest in your own house in some ways. Other people are taking care of you. Other people are supporting you. Other people are doing for you. As the comforter, you should come in. The door is open, is unlocked. You walk into the house, and you come to the mourner, and then you just sit. That is the essential of Shiva. When the mourner comes and says, my mom always liked playing chess, then you can come and say, oh, how long did she play chess for? You let the mourner guide your way. You do not try to guide the mourner. That's the idea here. Because no matter what you say, you can't drag them out of that pit. All you can do is go with them on their journey. And I think that's an essential thing that so many people get wrong with Shiva. Yeah, Sheila.
I was once embarrassed by an Orthodox woman.
Mhm.
And the point is, I came in, we had just come to Cleveland recently, and I knew the daughter. And I was taught you go and you introduce yourself. She had no idea who I was. And I was there for the daughter. And she went ahead and made a comment. And her daughter saw that and she apologized for it. But the point is, you go in very often, you're visiting someone whose relative is the one you know.
Mhm.
You know, the child or whatever, the brother or sister, and you want to say something, and it's a very touchy thing. I still go in and say, I am so and so, and I'm, and then the other people usually feel, if they're not very orthodox, they feel more comfortable also that someone is talking to them, to starting a conversation, because they don't
Yeah,
know what to say anymore.
right. And I think that you'll find that especially the later in the Shiva. Day 1, day 2, people have what to say. By day 7, often people are saying, "Oh, I'm ready for this
Enough.
to be over."
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a real feeling of I am I'm really done at this point because I haven't been allowed to do my work, right? And people have been coming and been saying, and again, no matter what, I think you're going to be stuck with people who are going to say things that are going to be incorrect, because people just don't know. It's people, we don't talk about death that very often, and so it's a very awkward moment when we do have to talk about death. Um, and I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to teach this class is I don't want people to be afraid of having these conversations. That's why I like when youth groups come and clean up the cemetery. It gives me a chance to have these conversations, so it's not taboo. Um, but yes, it's exhausting the week, and and your emotions are all mixed up. It is a emotionally exhausting time, and you're all over the place, and you don't want you're stuck being a guest in your own house, so you want to be like a host and say like, oh, thank you for these nice words, but you also kind of want to be like, stop talking to me about this, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, at least that's how I have felt in my time. You go all over the place, and I think there's also a piece of the person who is coming in and visiting, the acceptance of being the identified patient. By that I mean, this person, you have no idea what they're going through at that moment. Some people will be, will either be honestly feeling this way or at least claiming to feel this way, that they'll say, you know, this so and so was sick for a long time, I'm glad it's over. You'll have other people who will say, this was so sudden and shocked, I don't even know what to say. I'm in a total state of shock. Some will be especially in the real religious world, well, there must be a reason. It all happens for a reason. I'm not really dealing with it in that in a sorrow way, because this is God's plan. And some people, and I see Ronnie, your hand is raised, but I wanted to just finish off my thought. Some people will be angry, and I think that that's just reality. People can be angry, and then when you can't be angry at the real reason, you can't be angry at mom for not taking care of herself or for being sick, or you can't even. Sometimes people don't feel comfortable express anger at God for the world that they're in. It's possible that they might show that anger towards someone who is visiting. And just ask that when people are in that situation, while it's not fair that you're stuck with that weight being thrown at you, a moment of understanding and saying, that's what I need to do in that moment. And I'll even go as to say, when I was in the hospital doing chaplaincy, sometimes people who were sick and in the ICU would yell at me as the rabbi, because I was the only person they could yell at. They couldn't yell at the doctor, they couldn't yell at the social worker, they couldn't yell at the hospital administrator, because they didn't want to get kicked out of the hospital. But they could yell at me because who's the rabbi? There's someone that they can yell at. And you might be doing a real service sometimes, as much as it's unpleasant, to be that person to just let that anger come off on. And so it doesn't always happen, but that could happen too. Yes, Ron.
I was just going to say that well, this wasn't true with my dad, but because it was sudden and I was still in college and nobody knew me at work. But the worst day for me with my mom and my brother were the first day after Shiva. Because during Shiva, everybody knew what to do, what was going on. Yeah, but the first day after Shiva, going back to work, was the absolute worst days of my life. They were awful. I know we're not talking about that, but I just wanted to throw that out.
No, I agree, and we'll
Because
actually talk a little bit
people were
about that.
coming up to me, had no idea what had happened, why it had happened, didn't know that they had long-term illnesses and that the death was expected, et cetera, et cetera. And they were so insensitive. It was awful.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, and when we get into Shloshim, I want to tell you a little bit of a tough love story that I got when I was a little kid. But yes, it's hard, these pieces. So it's a good transition. For 7 days, you've been dealing with the Shiva, you've been dealing with all these things, and at the end of at the beginning of the seventh day. So it's no, you don't do the whole 7 days. You do the very beginning because we're in a rush to get out of the state. We're getting back to normal. You go for a walk. The Shiva, and usually if you're doing shacharit in the house, you'll do shacharit, and the people who came for the minyan will leave, and then you'll take a walk. It's a very strong tradition. Take this walk to go around the block. I actually, it's going back into the world. I remember having a conversation with one of my colleagues, one of my friends, right in the midst of COVID, and I said, I think after COVID, after the height of COVID, we all need to do this ritual, that we've been stuck in our house for more than 7 days. And there was an important piece to just get out and have that statement of like, I'm getting back into the normal world. And I think that's what that's doing in Shloshim. By the way, there's one other time during the Shiva that you go out of your house, and that would, well, two other things. If you can't make a minyan in your house, you can go to the synagogue to make a minyan if you need that. But also on Shabbat, you pause your morning. And what you do is for Kabbalat Shabbat, you'll notice that the mourner will not come in until the end of Lachadodi, because before that, it's all been additional stuff just to get you happy and excited for the day. You're technically still pre-Shabbat. So they won't come into the additional stuff that you've made for making Shabbat more joyous. They will wait until Shabbat actually starts. Usually the rabbi will ask all of us to say Hamakom Yonachem Etchem B'toch Sharei Av Leitzion V'Yerushalayim. We'll welcome in the mourner, and then we'll start going on to the next part of the service. Sheila, I see your hands raised. You're muted, Sheila.
In response to Ron, there was an article in the Plain Dealer when they still had a magazine on Sunday about wearing some sign. We usually still wear the ribbon. We wear the ribbon for 30 days. Is it? And there's some sign of mourning. Well, anyway, yeah. We are not the only ones. Apparently, you will see Catholics or whatever, they have a black band around their arms. These are all ways of showing people when you come back into after your funeral, Shiva, whatever, that you are in mourning. I remember very vividly, my father-in-law died a week after our wedding. And when Michael came back, he was at school, at seminary, and he was wearing his black tie that had been torn, and people were wishing him a mazel tov. And he pointed to the tie. Yeah, I have a mazel tov, and also a condolence. So, but then when we read this article, there are all kinds of, they have ribbons, they have little jewelry. There's some way well, I mean, we used to see, what was it? The Italians always wore the black, they wore black dresses and a veil. They kept up the mourning.
Yes.
Signs of mourning so that everybody knew,
Yeah,
treat them
absolutely. 100%. Robert, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, with the idea of walking around the block for Shiva, when I grew up in Brooklyn, I was always taught that not only did you walk around the block, but you had to go in and make a purchase from somebody that owned a store that wasn't Jewish. Where does that come from? And is that tradition, or was that the idea of it was from New York, or what was that?
So that's interesting. I haven't heard of that tradition before, so I can't quite answer it.
Where would you
Um,
find it sometimes?
right. I do think that the idea of buying makes sense because again, you have been in a state where you're not allowed to purchase. You're not caring for any of those outside world things. You're very internal world at that point. And Shloshim is starting now, and now you are moving on to being more external, more getting back into the real world. And, I will just say, we had said, you had said, is it custom or is it not custom? The walk is a custom in general. It's very, very strong custom. I don't know of a community that doesn't do that custom, but it is a custom nonetheless. It's not the level of halacha of law. Okay, so shloshim. Shloshim is going to be the next level. It's going to be the final level for anybody who isn't mourning a parent. Um, so right, so if that's for your siblings, for your children, for your spouse, this is the shloshim period. You're gonna say Kaddish, just like you've been saying for the Shiva. You're going to not shave is typically part of this. You're going to not buy new clothing. That's part of this. You're typically people will there's a custom to not sit in the same spot that your makom kavua, your regular spot in shul. You'll often see people sit in different spots when they're during this period because it's not their normal space. Right? People will often increase their learning in this point if they might have a practice to learn more Mishnah during the shloshim to try to learn to do extra learning in someone's memory. This is that period that is really going on, and there's a major, 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 major caveat to all this, which is the rabbis understand the importance of not losing your business over this. So I just told you you're not allowed to get a haircut or shave. But if you're in a business world where a stubbly beard is going to affect your business, the actual line that the rabbis give is, if someone came up to you and said, "Why do you look so dirty?" It's time for you to go get a shave. Right? Same with if you if your clothing, you don't have any new clean clothing. You ran out of clothing. You did your laundry, but it still looks all bach. They've been ripped. They've been torn. They're not in good shape. And someone says, you look all disheveled. You need to get new clothing. The second that someone says that to you, it changes your status in shloshim. Now you do have an ability to go buy and get new clothing. Before you're really not supposed to, but if it's going to affect your business, it changes. Probably the biggest case of this is one of the restrictions is you're not allowed to go to live music. It's supposed to be too festive, too joyous. But if you are in a band, let's say you're a wedding band, you absolutely can go work at the weddings for that period, for that time, because it would affect your business. You wouldn't be able to have your livelihood. In fact, in the video that I showed you, she made reference to it. There was one lady who said, "Oh, you're not going to be able to go to the bar mitzvah. I'll make you the person who puts the benchers out." Right? You can't go to the joyous event, but if I give you a job for the joyous event, well, then I would be taking away from you and your business, so you can do it. It's the loophole that people have been making to allow someone who is in the state of mourning, who's not supposed to go to a wedding or a bar mitzvah, to go to the wedding or the bar mitzvah. So
There
this is
was
this, yeah,
there was
yeah,
someone
Sheila.
there's an Orthodox rabbi who
Hmm.
said you don't ask if you want to go to a wedding, okay, and you're in mourning. It could be the year. You don't ask if a rabbi if I can go to the wedding. The question you ask, can I dance at the wedding? Or I guess, can I give out the benches at the wedding? In other words, you ask what another question. Then the rabbi will say you shouldn't be dancing at the wedding. And if he has any seichel, he will not say, but you shouldn't be going.
Right.
And this is from
Again,
an Orthodox, in fact, there were two of them who said the same thing.
Hmm.
Well,
It's how
technically,
you ask the
technically you can
question.
go to the chuppah, you just can't go to the party afterwards.
Correct.
But the chuppah also has, look, we had a tragedy in Cleveland where um, the father was murdered 2 days before the wedding. This was at Taylor Road
Yep.
Synagogue. The mother showed up for the grandmother wouldn't go. The mother went to the ceremony and then left. But the children were told they had to go on with the wedding.
That is the actual halacha. It's more of a rare case. I wasn't going to get into that rare case, but yes, I had a friend in rabbinical school when she was engaged. Her father passed away. The wedding was in 3 months, and the halacha is the Jewish tradition law is you don't stop the wedding. Once the wedding's been scheduled, the wedding goes on. Um, it, it's it, I mean it's one of those difficult moments, I think, similar to like what I was saying about the idea that shloshim will end mourning for a child in not so antiquity, right? My grandfather was one of 7 children, two of whom made it to adulthood, because that was the world he lived in his time. um in today's world, that's unthought of. So the idea that Shiva would be smaller for a child than it is for a parent is a crazy thought to us, I think, in our modern sense. But I think that that's one of the reasons why children are in the shloshim and not in the full avelut. So again, the main piece here is you can go to work now. You're back in the outside world. But the big change here is that when someone pushes on financial loss, now everything changes. Um, so I'm not sure. Someone asked the question, why does it work that way? The wedding keeps on going. I haven't studied that piece, but I do know that the wedding keeps on going. All right, so that's the case for 30 days. We'll finish up, and then at that point, every mourner but the child of of someone who died will be done with their mourning period. For the parent, you're going to continue on for 12 months. Now, the one caveat to that is we have a minhag. And again, same rule about shaving and things like that. If someone tells you you need a shave in the 11 months, you can shave, those type of things. I will tell you that when I was in the 11 months for my mother, I would wait a little bit longer to shave. I would wait to the point where it was very clear that I was unkept, and then I would clean myself up a little bit, because I thought that that was the right thing to do with the minhag. There is a minhag, and my teacher Rabbi Rabinowitz would tell you that it's not. He disagrees with this minhag, but it's an almost universal minhag again. That after 11 months you stop saying Kaddish, even though um, this mourning period happens for the full 12 months, and like you can't go to a party in the 11th month, um, even though you're not saying Kaddish. Then I see Ron, your hands raised. I will give you I'll give you the floor in a second, but I want to give the reason why. The reason behind this idea is that there's some sort of spiritual hierarchy of reaching Ha'olam Haba, and you keep on moving up to Ha'olam Haba. And the thought is, no one is so bad that your Kaddishes that are apparently helping you reach up to Ha'olam Haba would need full 12 months. And because of that, you don't want to say about your parent, oh, they needed the 12 months. They needed the full amount of time. And so you say, no, I'll do it for 11 months. And I pause at that point. I continue my rest of my morning rituals, but I don't say Kaddish for that last month. Another thing I think would be a nicer way to think of it maybe is to make the yahrzeit actually feel more meaningful. You've been saying Kaddish every day, and the day before you've been saying it, the day after, you might lose something on that actual first yahrzeit. So even though that's not the original reason, it might be what I might repurpose, similar to like on Elul, we blow shofar every day, except for the day before, because we don't want it to drown out what we do on Rosh Hashanah. Ron, then Robert.
Well, this is more of a question. Is it really 12 months or is it a year? and therefore in a leap year you do 12 months instead of 13?
That's a good question. I would say it's a year. I think a year is probably a better way to do it, although the 11 months is still going to be that piece, because yard site is not by the date of death, it's by the date of not by the date of burial, it's by the date of death. And that's what we're really going up to. So I'm not actually sure. Very good question. I'm not actually sure when you would stop. I still think you would stop on the 11th month and you would have the extra gap. Because again, if the idea is that your tefillah is helping someone ascend to Halam Haba, then you don't want to say, well, they needed 12 months because it was a leap month. You would still do the 11 months. That's what my gut says, but I haven't done the research to really say that in a very confident way. Yes, Robert.
Yes. I was taught it's 11 months and 1 day because of this business of the spirit rising. And if it's a full year, it's too far. And if it's 11 months, it may not be quite enough. So therefore, it's 11 months and 1 day. And I understand this is not necessary halakha, it's tradition, but just comment on that. Is it 11 months? It is 11 months and 1 day, or where does this come from?
Actually, that sounds like it sounds like the 11 months and 1 day makes sense. Just like you count the Shiva, if you got 1 minute on that first day and up to Shachrit on the 7th day, it sounds like the same kind of thing.
Right, and I would lean towards that. I think you can go either way. Again, this is all big pieces in custom, but it's similar also to traditionally you don't become bar or bat mitzvah until you are 13 and 1 day. That is really the tradition, is to say that 1 day is now you're in your 13th year as opposed to being at the age of 13, or you're in your 12th year as opposed to being at the age of 12. So it would make sense to do it that way. Although again, we are dealing with minhag upon minhag now, and so I think there's space
You have
for
to
different
wait
pieces.
for a year and a day.
What? What are you saying? A year and a day? I missed that, Sheila.
Oh, yeah. The medical tests, like a mammogram and certain tests, you always have to wait a year and a day. They're always
Yeah.
counting the headaches.
But that's for
Medicare.
insurance, Sheila. That's insurance reasons, not medical reasons.
No, I know insurance.
You do it for a bris too. You do it a week and a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to think about it.
Yeah.
Although, by the way, our math is really bad on bris too, if you think about it too, because the day of the birth counts, and you do it at the very beginning of that 8th day. So it's really, it's not.
It's like Shiva.
It's very similar to Shiva, right? A partial day counts as a full day. And now I'm going to get into.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to your chauffeur comment, and then I'll let you go on.
Sure.
The reason for not blowing shofar the day before Rosh Hashanah is because cross Satan. And therefore, if you blow shofar the day before Rosh Hashanah, when you go to blow on Rosh Hashanah, whoever the shofar blower is, that note isn't coming out. I just want you to know that.
I hear it. I also there is also a rabbinic tradition of the idea of being excited to hear the mitzvah, and if you're here the day before, you'll be less excited. It's similar, by the way.
I do the same thing with matzah, except I don't eat it from Purim to Passover.
It's gonna bring up matzah. The tradition, actually, I mean, some people are like me, are very strict, like you, Ron, and will not eat it for a whole year. But the tradition is you really shouldn't eat it for the month before. From Purim on to Pesach, people don't traditionally eat matzah because they need to be excited. I don't know how excited I can get, but excited to eat the matzah. So my last two things I'm just going to tell you, because I don't want to lose on any of them, are halachic math, which is kind of crazy, and I just want you to know about it, and unveiling, right? So halachic math means there is a tradition that a communal simcha beats out personal mourning. So if you had to put a hierarchy, your personal mourning's here, but the communal simcha is really high. So an example of that would be Sukkot. Sukkot is literally named Zman Simchatenu. So if your loved one unfortunately passes away the day before Sukkot and is buried that same day, I guess let's say buried dies 2 days before, is buried the day before, you get home with an hour to spare before Sukkot starts. That is your shiva. Once Sukkot starts, Shiva is over, and you are now on pause. You're not in mourning, and when Sukkot ends, you'll be in Shloshim, and you'll start your Shloshim from the first day after Simchat Torah. Will begin your Shloshim. If, by the way, someone dies during Sukkot, they get buried on Sukkot. So let's say they died on the first day of Sukkot, and you wait until the third day, until Chol Hamoed, to bury them. You buried them on the third day. You do not start Shiva until after Sukkot stops. So now you have to wait for Simchat Torah to end. It's been 5 days since that person has died, and now you're going to start Shiva. And after that Shiva, you'll do Shloshim, and you'll move on from there. The most, I would say, the most challenging moment, I think, would be, I'm just throwing that out here, is someone who dies, who's buried Erev Yom Kippur. So I want you to think about it. You die Erev Yom Kippur. Your Shiva gets canceled out by Yom Kippur. So you might have had 2 hours of Shiva. Yom Kippur ends, and for 5 days you're in Shloshim. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sukkot hits. Shloshim is over. You had a 5-day Shloshim and a half a day, or a couple hours of Shiva, and you are done being a mourner. And I throw that out there because
when my uncle died, that's what we had.
Right. It doesn't happen for minor holidays, so you should know that for like Chanukah or Purim, things like that. But for major holidays, for Rosh Hashanah, for Sukkot, for Shmini Atzeret, for Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, and Shavuot, it will cancel out Shiva or Shloshim depending on what state you're in. So that's another piece that often comes in, and sometimes will even be the thought that someone has in the midst of doing all the burials. Will be like, is it better to, someone dies Erev Sukkot, is it better to try to bury as quickly as possible to do it before Sukkot, or to do it right at the beginning of Chol Hamoed, and then it's been a week since the person's died to start Shiva off? I'm not sure which is better. It's a complicated time, but it's an understanding that, again, Zman Simchatenu, the time of our joy, defeats your personal sorrow. Your communal joy is something that is above it all. So it's something to think about on the math and how this works. All right, the final piece is something that really came up as a question on my first session, which was about matzevot, which is about tombstones, and unveiling. So traditionally in the Ashkenaz world, it's usually that after that first year, you have an unveiling. There isn't, again, such a strict ruling around it, but usually we wait to that piece. In the Sephardic world, by the way, they do it much earlier. And again, you're gonna calculate by yahrzeit, not by the 12 months essentially of that time, because that yahrzeit was the date of death, not the date of burial. And we have had a big tradition throughout our history of stones. I'll tell you about my organization. Unfortunately, we're dealing with people who are poor who can't afford stones. So actually, one of the fundraisers we do is called the Leave Your Mark campaign, where people can donate a stone to someone who can't afford one, because often there are places where they have had no stones, and we're trying to make sure that they get that honor. There really isn't so much strictness to it, although I think we should be keeping in mind the rules that we had for burial and for funeral in mind, right? Our tahara, our tachrichin are simple because we don't want to. Our tachrichin are simple because we don't want to over embellish and make someone feel like they're too poor to be able to die properly. And our coffins are typically our coffins are typically what's it called, are typically standard and traditional, because again, we don't want to embellish and make people feel lesser by not being able to afford something. So very popular, especially when I was in Queens, in the Bukharian community, are these black stones that will cost you tens of thousands of dollars to put up, and then they'll put an etching of a person with their face. You can do all these things, but I would caution to say, is that the message that we're sending? Right? What are our goals? Typically, it will say two Hebrew letters on the top that would stand for "Here Lies," and on the bottom the letters will be put on the bottom that stand for "May this person be bound up in the bond of life." Those are the statements that are being said there. Traditionally, just fun facts that I only recently learned when I started working at this institution. Women typically have a menorah, not really a menorah, it's really a candelabra, but it looks like a menorah on their tombstones, and men typically have a Star of David. And the reason is more because of the women, because women light Shabbat candles traditionally in most traditional houses, and so therefore they had them have the candles up. For men, the Star of David is kind of like the default on the other side. However, for Kohanim, you'll see people have their fingers up. And again, someone just said it, and the washing cup. But there
And
is really flexibility.
there's a lot of etrogim at our cemetery.
Yeah, people have different customs, and also things go through styles. I always take the groups out to a certain area to do fall leaf cleanup because it's under a big tree at our cemetery. And I was always amazed by, I always get caught by the same Yiddish matzeva. It's all in Yiddish, with the exception of the hammer and sickle that are sitting right on the top of it, because she was part of the Bund. She was part of the socialist workers movement in the Lower East Side, and she wanted her hammer and sickle to be representative of who she was. Again, I think you have to put in context. This is in the 1919s. This stone, before kind of the Stalinist purges and all these things that probably you wouldn't want to have a hammer and sickle these days. But when she was doing it as a pure, strong feeling socialist, and she wanted to have that on her stone. And it probably is not so uncommon for Lower East Side Jews of that time to have that stone. It's something to think about. But in our cemetery, we have all sorts of unique stones. In the 1920s, we are filled with stones that look like broken trees. And that was a common custom in the 20s and 30s for a person who did not live a long life. They lived into their 20s or 30s, and it was a symbol that, just like the tree that was cut too early, they were a tree that was cut too early, kind of going on the line in Tanakh that says Ki Adam Eitz Hasadeh. A person is like a tree in the field.
There are a lot of them. We have a lot of them at Beit Olam.
Right, and these styles happen over and over again. My grandmother-in-law, right, my wife's grandmother, it was part of the Syrian community. And in the Syrian community, they will take a stone like this, and then they'll have a stone going out over the body, a big, thick granite stone. I don't know how much these things cost, but they must be super expensive. But it's an 18-inch stone out over the entire grave, because I think they were very clear that they didn't want anybody stepping on the grave. And so the way to do that is to make this giant granite stone going out, as well as the 3-foot stone that's going up.
Then you also couldn't have a robbery because
Right.
you couldn't get into it.
I mean, I'll be honest, sadly, it's less about robbery. I think it's more about animals, to be real. Like,
Yeah.
I'll tell you the saddest thing I've been to, sometimes at our cemetery, we will have a burial for a fetus. Right? Because we have people who are very concerned about that, and we want to make sure that the burial is happening. You're not digging the same level of grave in depth for that fetus, right? We'll put actually on the little headstone, the plastic headstone that we put up there, they will say, like, we have a plastic marker, and it will say fetus of, and it'll just give the initials because we don't really want to make it into a bigger thing. But we will put a stone over that one because it's not covered in a coffin. It's not going 6 feet down. And we just want to make sure that no animal comes across it and tries to bring it up and eat it. I think that's really the bigger reason for those stones often. And you'll see those are much more common in Israel, where they don't have coffins typically as that extra barrier.
That's right. When you see the pictures in Israel, it's a flat, but they don't have the headstone, most of them.
Most of them don't have the headstone. They have a.
The new style. I know we just did that for my husband, and Park Synagogue has a whole section in Beit Olam, and also they were all flat.
I think that's a cause of the reality of not having a coffin, is that you need to make sure that that body's covered so that way no animals get to it. Again, we're not having so many possessions in our graves. We're not having any possessions, right? We intentionally tachrichin do not have pockets, so you can't take anything with you. And so really that's the preservation of the body is what we're looking at, and making sure that no animal or creature gets into that area when they don't have it. It's kind of more of a gruesome thing that I don't really like to think about, but that's really probably the function of those things. But in America, I think it's very much people don't want to have people stepping on their graves. And in general, when you visit a grave, a cemetery, you should try your best not to step on a grave, because you're trying to show honor to people who are buried there. We have about 3 minutes left, so I want to pause and say if there's any questions, I am here for questions.
Okay, so go ahead. While you're discussing stepping on a grave, you know, today we no longer use boxes, we use markers at the end of the graves. And I hate to say this, but the funeral directors are the worst defenders about stepping on graves and having people step on graves.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, so what I'll pause to say is, I think a lot of it's about intentionality. I mentioned this. My chaplain at the cemetery, every time I've been with him multiple times, he will ask mechila, forgiveness of the body that he is burying, 3 times. He'll ask it when he takes it out of the fridge. He'll ask it when he's walking along with the body getting towards the grave, and he'll ask for it when he's going down. And these are often people who have no family with them, because he's like, I'm sorry, I can't give you a more respectful, I can't speak a eulogy about you. I don't have any words to share about you in this moment. And I think that's about it's really about intentionality. When I have these groups and they're coming and they're cleaning up leaves for an infant burial area from 110 years ago, they're going to step on the graves because they're doing the work of cleaning it off. And I'm saying, is your purpose to step on the graves, or is your purpose to clean off these graves and give them honor? If your purpose is to clean off the graves and give them honor, then yeah, you might need to step on the graves to give them that honor, to do that proper cleaning. And you should be mindful of that in your sense. If you're taking a body to bury it in a plot next to it, and there's no other way but to step on those graves that are next to it, you're doing it not because you want to be inconsiderate of the person below, but because this is a tight space and this is the place to put them in. So I would give a little bit, although I would always try to remind people that it's become a business and it shouldn't be. And so I'm very mindful of these things. When I was in the pulpit, my rule was always, I would stay at the funeral longer than everybody else. The family would go back to the Shiva house. I would sit there and wait for the grave diggers to finish digging the grave before I left, right? Because we would cover the body, but they would do the end part. It was intentional because I knew that if the rabbi stood there, they wouldn't talk about the football game that happened the day before, because for them, they're doing this every day. They're doing this multiple times a day. And I can't fault them even for making normal talk in their business work. But if the rabbi's there, they're going to be less likely to do that. And I can keep the focus on that person who's buried there. So I just always think that's an important piece there.
Okay, so I thank you very much. And my only other comment is, as you said, the funeral director has a responsibility here.
Mhm.
And I feel it may not be the cemetery. I happen to be on the board of one of the cemeteries in Cleveland. Okay. And my feeling is that the desecration of the area of the cemetery can be avoided. I understand the tight squeeze. I understand that we have to set up chairs on certain graves, on certain funerals. I totally get that. There does not have to be, if you have a path in front of a grave and or you have side areas by a grave when you're doing a funeral, there is no need for people to be stomping all over graves, is all that I'm saying. And I am saying it is behooving on the funeral directors and the rabbi in charge of that funeral to make sure that it doesn't happen. It's not on the cemetery director.
I agree with that. The cemetery director is not out there. Yes, we are very conscious. We should be very conscious to do that, and I agree with you.
In our cemetery, the cemetery director happens to be out there at every funeral because that is our rule.
Right. No, I totally agree. There's an idea of covenant and respect. Okay, so with that, we are past 8:30. I want to thank everybody for coming out for all these sessions. I am still available. If you have questions, you feel free to email me. I know Rabbi Foster, someone has asked for my email just before. I've gotten emails. So if you have a question, I'm happy to answer them. And I want to thank you all for coming out all these evenings.